I lay down on the surgical table, and before they put the mask on or anything, I look to my right, and it's like Jesus walked into the surgical room, and he holds out his hand and he says, "I want to answer your prayer." So I grab his hand. As soon as I do, we are standing on what feels like the side of a mountain. And at the bottom of the mountain that I'm standing on, there's this huge city in this valley. Wherever I was, that was the New York City of that place. That was a bustling city. Jesus says to me, "It's the glory of the Lord." I don't fear death at all. I've always said death is like moving. We're all going to die, and there's no need to fear. We were made to live forever.
The A.J. Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast.
I'm here with Mike McKinsey. He had an amazing near-death experience. Hello, Mike. How are you?
Hey, good.
What happened that day when you walked into an emergency room?
Well, I got there pretty late. I had just attended my son's wedding. This was late on a Saturday night, and I had been feeling a little ill for 4 days leading up to the wedding. I thought, if I can, I thought I was getting the flu, and I thought if I could just make it to get through the wedding, then I'll go get checked out afterwards. I always kid around and say, I'm a guy, we don't go to the doctor. We put everything off. And of course I did. And it almost cost me my life this time. So I went to the ER after the wedding. It was probably about midnight on a Saturday. And they finally got me in the back and they said, "What are your symptoms?" I said, "Well, I'm feeling kind of sick. I think I've got the flu." And the lady, the nurse is kind of poking around on my abdomen, and she says, "Does that hurt?" I said, "No." And she takes out this little mallet, like what they thump your knees, they tap your knee to see what your reflexes are. And she taps the bottom of my foot, and she says, "Does that hurt?" And I said, "No." And I'm thinking, what's she doing? Tapping the bottom of my foot, Then she tapped the other foot, and I can't remember if it was right or left, but I had pain in my abdomen from that little tap that made me scream. And I thought, okay, something's wrong here. She says, "Well, that's your appendix. I'm going to have to call in a surgeon." And I kind of thought, 4 days before that, I was playing baseball with my kids in the park, and I was doing a lot of twisting that I don't normally do. So maybe I ruptured my appendix or hurt my appendix. I don't know. Yeah, I didn't know much about the medical side of it. So she calls in a surgeon. He gets there probably about an hour later, and he's poking around and he says, "Have you done any physical activities lately?" And I said, "Well, I played baseball with my kids on Wednesday, and this is Saturday." And he looks at me and he goes, "Wednesday?" And he kind of counts down. He says, "That was okay. So now it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday." He says, "That was 3 days ago." He says, "We better get in there quick, because if it ruptured on Wednesday, we got a mess in there to clean up." So they wheel me back into surgery. They bring me through the surgical doors, and it was freezing in there, and they had checked my temperature as 104, so it was pretty high temperature. I lay down on the surgical table, and before they put the mask on or anything, I look to my right, and it's like Jesus walked into the surgical room. The physical person, it was almost like the surgeon walked in, but it was Jesus. And he's wearing a white robe. He looks a little different than what I'd seen as a kid. His skin was darker than what I thought. He had dark bluish green eyes, mostly green, dark brown hair, kind of wavy, short beard. And he holds out his hand and he says, "I want to answer your prayer." And I'm looking at him, and I kind of look around at and there's nothing else there. It's like I'm just laying in this mist almost. Is weird. And he says, "I want to answer your prayer." And I thought, my prayer? What the heck? What's going on here? And then I thought, oh, maybe I died, because Jesus is here. Maybe he's taking me to heaven. But I thought, I've always heard that when people have these near-death experiences, they float away from their body. And, I didn't do that. And so I thought, well, maybe I'm not dead, but what the heck's going on? Very confused. So he's still holding his hand out. So I grab his hand. As soon as I do, we are standing on what feels like the side of a mountain, but everything is white around me. It's blinding white. But I look down at my feet, and my bare feet I'm standing on this grass that's this beautiful green, perfect, almost like it's mowed, perfect grass. It felt cool to the touch. It almost felt moist, but it wasn't wet. And my senses were heightened to the point where I could count every single blade of grass that was touching my feet. I knew exactly how many blades of grass were touching my feet instantly. And I'm looking around, and everything else is just completely white. Like I said, blinding white. But then I make out, it looks like a basketball size round orb, like off to my right. And it's whiter than the rest of the white. So it's kind of glowing, and it was really pretty. It was like shimmering. And all of a sudden this light, the basketball shaped light, starts sending out these beams of light that look like fluorescent light tubes, but they're shorter. They're about 2 feet long. They're a little bit fatter. And these things start coming at me. They're going zipping by, and they're kind of shimmering too. They're the same kind of white. And one of them hits me in the forehead, and it goes through me. As it goes through, it makes this kind of like a slight buzzing sound, and it warmed me like all the way down to my toes. I was completely warm. It was a beautiful feeling. And I look back at that light source, and all of a sudden, it's like somebody took a curtain and just pulled it from my right to my left. So it's like somebody's opening a curtain, and now that white is gone. So now I'm looking at this scene. It's there. I'm standing on a mountain. I can see that now. Below me are like these like little flowers. They seem to be kind of moving in the wind, but there's no wind. They're pastel colors and just beautiful, beautiful flowers. And at the bottom of the mountain that I'm standing on, there's a city. There's this huge city in this valley. But the fog that was in front of my face, that was pulled aside like the curtain, is now settled in that city. So all I can see are rooftops sticking through. It's like the fog has settled on this city, and the rooftops are sticking through. And there's a bunch of like gold Capitol domes. There's one really big one that looks like a golden Capitol dome, and it's very, very shiny. There's a bunch of other like white buildings. Some of them look like Capitol domes, but there's a lot of them that look like church steeples. And one of the things that I noticed about the white church steeples sticking through there, was that there are no crosses on the top of them. You know how churches have crosses, but there's no crosses on these. I thought that was interesting. The one thing that I remember thinking when I saw that city was wherever I was, that was the New York City of that place. That was a bustling city, and I couldn't see people or, whatever was, driving them around, whether it's cars or horses or, whatever. I couldn't see that because of that veil that was over it, that mist or the fog. I wish I could have, but when I think back on it, as a kid, I said, Jesus, show me heaven. And he did. He showed me just enough to say, okay, I answered your prayer, kid. That's all you get to see for now. The buildings were, well, most of the ones that I saw were like church steeples, the tall ones. And then like if you have your regular like state capitol dome, a lot of them look like that, but there was one very big one, almost in the center. It was closer to me but it was almost in the center of this building. And that was huge. And that was one of the gold tops. But on the other side of that city is another mountain, and it goes way up, like it's huge. And it's covered in these beautiful, like they look like pine trees, but they're perfectly shaped. They have these dainty little needles on them, and they're I mean, it's perfect. And then above that is this sky that looks like the most beautiful sunset I've ever seen, with reds and yellows and oranges and then blue and green. The colors were just amazing. Um, but there was no sun. So, it's a sunset with no sun. I thought that was very strange. Now, all of a sudden, these light beams that were coming by me, they're still going by, but they're going across the valley over the city. And one of them hits the tip of one of those pine trees. And it's like it had a diamond on the tip of it, because when that light beam hit the tip of that tree, that the light burst into these hundreds of tiny little light beams. It was like fireworks going off, like pow, but they were all white, like super white. And then more of the light beams went across and they hit more of the tree tips. And there was just fireworks going off everywhere. It's like pow, 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 just everywhere. And it was just amazing. And I looked back at the light source. And when I did, Jesus says to me, "It's the glory of the Lord." And I was just like, wow. When he said that, I got so emotional that I got weak in my knees. And I fell to my knees. And when my knees hit the ground, at the instant my knees hit the ground, they shocked me and they brought me back. And so now, instead of this beautiful scene, I've got a couple doctors leaning over me saying, one of the doctors says, "Do you know your name?" And I said Mike, but I said it in my mind. I didn't think about trying to verbalize it. So he looks at me again and he says, "Do you know your name?" And I said Mike, but it's very hard to talk because my throat was so dry. And I said Mike, and he goes, "Okay, good. Do you know where you are?" And I was thinking, well, I was at my son's wedding, surgery. It's coming back to me. And I said, "I'm in Ventura." That was the city we were in for his wedding. And when I said Ventura, he says, "Okay, he's back." And he turns around and he looks at some other people in the room. There's a bunch of nurses in there. That's like 5 or 6 nurses, all wearing scrubs. And he says, "Let's get him up to ICU." So I spent 4 days in ICU, and I spent about, 12 days in the hospital. Had some complications. I had pneumonia and developed an abscess that they couldn't find. And it was a mess. So spent quite a while there, but finally made it out. It took a while to put it all together. I was pretty confused by the whole thing, but from the beginning, when Jesus showed up, I was confused. So when you're in the hospital, all you do is lay flat on your back, and I was so weak that I had a lot of time to just kind of think about it and go over it. And a lot of the stuff, like when Jesus said, "I want to answer your prayer," I had to think back, what I obviously didn't pray that I would die. I prayed that everything would be fine, that I would make a recovery and be okay. But I remember when I was a kid, I used to pray to God to show me heaven, because I wanted to see it. I always said, "God, you made me with this analytical mind. I need to take apart the watch to see the gears and the springs. I want to know how everything works." And I was at my grandpa's funeral, and they were saying, "He's in heaven now. There's no more tears. There's no more pain. There's no suffering." And I remember thinking, that's a really cool place. Sounds like a neat place. I'd like to see that. So, "God, could you show me heaven?" And I used to pray that as a kid, to show me heaven. So that was the answer to that one. And then the other thing that I noticed, when I was there, I said the steeples, the church steeples, didn't have any crosses. And I found out, like, a couple years later, I was reading in the Bible and something just hit me, where it says, when Jesus died on the cross, he said, it is finished. And so there's no, in heaven, you're not going to celebrate the cross, because there's no reason. We're there. We're there to live with Jesus, to live with God. And, we don't need to celebrate the cross. So I think that was kind of my answer to that one. Jesus actually showed up in my hospital room the next day, and I've never told that story publicly. But it wasn't a physical person. It was something holy entered the room, and I spoke with him for 3 hours, and it was pretty wild. He just told me a few things that I would go through, that it wasn't time to tell the story yet, but he was going to use me to bring glory to his kingdom. Just things like that. I mean, it was pretty detailed. When I could finally pick up my hand and off my chest, because I was, like I said, I was that weak, I started writing down. I took a lot of notes in the hospital about what had happened. And so I'm going back and looking at those notes now, and I'm thinking, okay, he's telling me now to tell the rest of the story. And it is pretty detailed. But there was some prophetic stuff, some things that were going to happen in my life, and now looking back on it, it all came true. So, and I kept saying, "Are you sure it's you? Are you really here?" And there were. I remember when my mom's grandmother passed away. She wanted to die at home. She had cancer, and my mom told me that just before her mother took her last breath, my mom said something holy entered the room. And I used to like push for more. I'd be like, "Mom, what do you mean? What does that mean?" And she goes, "I can't even describe it, but I know that something holy entered the room." Now, if it was, Jesus there to take her to heaven, angels, I don't know, whatever. But after Jesus showed up in my hospital room, I got it. And yeah, I had that flashback, like something holy entered the room. And until you're in that presence, you just can't, you can't describe it. It's really something. I had been married for a long time. My wife came in to see me the next day, and she says, "How are you feeling?" And I said, "Well, you're not, I'm not feeling so great yet." I was so weak, I couldn't pick my hands up off my chest. That's how bad it was. And I was laying in bed. I was all sweaty. I was just a mess. But I tried to tell her what happened, and I just started crying. I couldn't get it out. Next day she comes in, same thing. So the third day I was finally able to tell her, and I cried all the way through it. I said, "I just can't believe this happened." And I told some friends, and some of my closer friends, I told them about it when I was finally released and got home. And they had kind of the same reaction. Like I just couldn't tell it without breaking down in tears. So it took a long time before I was able to kind of publicly talk about it. It took about 10 years before I told it publicly. Of course, I didn't go on YouTube or anything like that. I just, I started doing that. That took 20 years before I started telling that part. And a lot of the comments I got, they would say, "Well, you had a high fever, and that causes hallucinations." And I thought, well, the next day when I was talking to Jesus, my temperature was down to 100.5. So it wasn't a high fever hallucination, and I think God wanted me to hear all those comments, like, your dying brain does this, and, and I just kept thinking, God's giving me all these answers to all these questions, and I need to start kind of fighting back, for lack of a better term, to tell people what happened. Because I know it wasn't hallucination. I know it wasn't the dying brain, because I would have thought the dying brain would bring back something familiar. They wouldn't throw my dying brain wouldn't show me a different looking Jesus, because this was totally different than what I'd seen as a kid. And I would think that it would show me something familiar, so it would comfort me. And then there's the medication. Everybody says, "Well, maybe it's medication you were on." Yeah, but when I went to surgery, I looked to my right, and there's Jesus standing there. They hadn't even given me an IV yet. This actually happened 20 years ago. This happened in 2004. And I felt like when I was in the hospital, I told God, I said, "Okay, I'll tell people what happened, because this could bring some real glory to your kingdom. I mean, this is an amazing thing for Jesus to show up, not as a spirit, but as a physical person." It was just bizarre. But I don't feel like he was telling me, "This is what I want you to do," or "This is what I want you to say." I waited a long time. I wrote a book it took me like 8 years to get the book out. But and that's when I finally was able to start telling publicly. But then this publishing company called Guidepost contacted me and they said, we want to write your story in one of our books. And so that made me start doing a little marketing and saying, okay, now I'm going to tell the full story, about what happened. Because there's so many moving parts to this story. It's crazy how but God just wouldn't let it die. He just kept, urging me on, hey, I want you to tell this story now, and you can tell the rest of the story later, but I want this part out now. And, so it's the story that won't go away. It's really funny. I mean, it's beautiful because of what happened. It's really something that I got to see the glory of God.
How was your life changed after this experience?
The one thing that I really started doing was slowing down. I had a really stressful job when this happened. I was a superintendent for a real estate development company. I had 30 to 35 houses at different stages of construction. So, and they're all on a timeline. We were cranking out 2 houses a week. We started 2 houses a week, and we just never stopped. That went on for 60 years. That company was around. 2 houses a week. So it was very stressful. I had, construction guys, trying to keep them on schedule and keep them doing the work right and up to, our quality. And I had to walk through all those houses every day, make sure they were, at the right stage. And then I had kids that were in athletics. I was coaching. We had homework. We had to figure out, at the end of the night where to get dinner. I mean, it was just super stressful, and it was just day after day after day. So one of the things that I started doing was slowing down and just really appreciating God's beautiful creation. I mean, my iPhone now is full of pictures of flowers and sunsets, and I'll stop and smell roses, and it's not just a cliche for me. I really slowed down, and I appreciated the beauty of this creation.
Have you met Jesus apart from the day after? Have you had encounters with Jesus?
Since that NDE, I've heard God's voice several times. I think last time I counted was six times. And each time, there was one time, if I can tell you this quick story, it's pretty interesting. My church was raising money to send kids to church camp. And so they were having a fundraiser, and it was a big spaghetti dinner at church. The church wasn't a huge church, but they were trying to raise money. So they sold tickets for $20 a piece, and then, the youth group made the spaghetti, and they're raising money. So what they wanted to do was take kids from the neighborhood and put them on a bus and send them to church camp for a week. And they wanted to pay for that so the kids would ride it for free, but it cost $50 for each kid to go. So they were doing this fundraiser, and I'm sitting there with my wife and my kids, and I hear somebody behind me say, I want you to give $1,000. And I kind of turned around like, what? There's nobody back there. And so I said, what? And the voice says again, I want you to give $1,000. And so I turned around real quick because I'm thinking one of my buddies is back there, saying this, kind of punking me, right? Making me give up $1,000. There's nobody there. And so I looked at my wife and I said, did you say something? And she says, no. So I said out loud, I said, I don't have $1,000 to give. And the voice says, you'll get it back. And I thought, what the heck? So, now I said, okay, I got to get outside and clear my mind. My checkbook was in my car. So I walk outside, I get my checkbook, and I sit down in the car, and I close the door, and I go, okay, Lord, if you're telling me to give $1,000, I'll do it. But you said I'd get it back, but I don't see how I'm going to get $1,000 back. But I'm going to do it. I'm going to step out in faith. So I walk back in. And as I'm walking back in, a buddy of mine saw me leave, and he got up to come after me because he thought maybe something was wrong. And he says, hey, you okay? And I said, dude, you're not going to believe God just told me to give $1,000, and he said I'd get it back. And my friend goes, whoa. He says, well, I'll tell you what, if that was God, he knows that you would tell me, and I was going to take that as a challenge. So I'm doing it too. And I said, hey, he didn't say you would get it back. And he says, I know. So we go up, we write a check for $1,000 each, and we give it to the, and everybody's all happy and clapping, right? So we go home. The next day I go to work. This is on a Monday. I go to work, and I came home at lunch because I was working had built a house inside the subdivision where I was working. And I log onto my computer, and I used to do day trading back then. I had a TD Ameritrade account, and I had, maybe $1,000 in there at the most, right? A couple thousand. And I would do these day trades where I would pick a cheap stock, and I'd buy some, and at the end of the day or end of the week, I'd sell it. And if I made $20 a week or $50 a week, I thought, I'm doing pretty good. It's my part-time job. And it was fun. Well, that day, the next day after I'd written the $1,000 check, I log on at noon, and there was $1,000 more in that account. And so I wasn't thinking of the check I wrote yet. I'm like, whoa, $1,000 more. What's going on? I look up, one of the stocks had gone way up. It was some speculative stock that I bought. So I thought, oh boy, I better sell it. So I sell, I get, a couple minutes later. Back then it wasn't so fast. This was like early 90s, I think. So it took a while for the trade to come through, and it says confirmation trade, And so I look at the amount, and I go, wow, I just made $1,000, and it hit me. $1,000. I just got my $1,000 back. My check hadn't even cleared the bank, and I'd already gotten the check back, or the money back. It was that fast. So I thought, well, okay, that was definitely God.
What are your religious beliefs now?
I was always a Christian, but I would say I was more of probably your typical Christian, Sunday Christian. I'd go to church on Sundays and worship God, and then the rest of the week just kind of live and do whatever I wanted. Wasn't really a follower of Jesus, but that changed. That was one of the biggest changes for me after the NDE was I became a follower of Jesus.
How do you define that?
I live my life now to please him. I feel like he's walking with me wherever I go. I live on a 12-acre ranch surrounded by national forest. It's a beautiful area. And I'm always doing something. And whenever I'm doing something, he's right there with me. And I'll talk to him all day. The Bible says, pray without ceasing. I do that. I talk to him all day long. And I don't always hear his voice, but I know he's there. And I can feel I hear his voice in my spirit now. So I feel like I have a great relationship with Jesus.
How do you feel about other near-death experiencers?
I think I pretty much have the same opinion of near-death experiencers that I always did. I think that everybody that goes through something has to interpret it, and everybody interprets it differently. Like for me, when I met Jesus, maybe somebody would not meet Jesus. I don't know. I've always thought that that some people will embellish things a little bit. A good example of this is when I first heard the little kid, his last name was Burpo, heaven is real kid. And I thought something happened to him, but he came back and said his grandpa had wings. And I thought, well, we don't become angels. So maybe he made that up, or maybe that was just his interpretation. Maybe God put wings on grandpa to show him, hey, this is the way it is. Maybe that's what a kid would see, I don't know.
What I've seen after interviewing over 100 near-death experiencers is that no two NDEs are identical. However, they do share common traits. And everyone sees Jesus in their own way. They even see God in their own way. What are you presently doing to carry out his divine plan, or how are you helping people?
The one thing that I'm doing now, of course, I'm telling about the NDE, and I think my job, I can't convert somebody to believe in Jesus or believe in God, but I can plant a seed. And I think that's what I'm supposed to do. Hopefully somebody will say, this Jesus guy sounds pretty cool. Maybe I'll check into it, and then let the Holy Spirit take over from there, convict their heart. That's all I'm called to do as a Christian, is just plant the seed. The first book that I wrote as fiction because, it's kind of funny. I had this experience that was so physical that I thought, well, I wonder if, when you die, maybe you don't just become a spirit. Maybe God gives you a temporary body and you go somewhere. What if heaven was a real physical place right now? And so I kind of had fun with that, writing a little bit about that. It was semi-autobiographical, but it was more I just had fun with it. That book came out in 2012, I think, or 10. I don't know. Accidental Heaven. It's still out there on Amazon, and I'm writing another one now that's similar to that, but it's more like my whole life story about how, the NDE, the day after the day that Jesus showed up in the hospital, and I want to get all that out there now, but I can't release it until God says, "Hey, go for it, buddy."
How were your religious beliefs before you had your experience? Were you a true Christian?
Like I said, a Sunday Christian. I didn't even, I don't think I belonged to a church for the longest time, but when we had kids, we thought we need to get them into church and, raise them right. And so we did, we bounced around from church to church, and then we finally found a place. And that, I think we'd gone there maybe a year or so before I had the NDE. But just, I don't know, it just didn't really mean a lot to me. It really didn't. And then after the NDE, I thought, okay, Jesus just gave me a wake-up call. And so I'm going all in.
How did your church react when you started sharing your story?
A couple people sort of looked at me like, when you tell a story, you can sort of tell, they're tracking with you and they're believing. I think a few of them believed it, but I don't think most of them did, and to be honest, I've heard a lot of Christians say, well, near-death experiences aren't biblical, so we just don't believe in them. But, the Apostle Paul had what he called a near, he didn't call it a near-death experience, but he had one. And he said he was taken up to the third heaven, whether in spirit or in body, he didn't know, so I thought that was pretty interesting. But a lot of times somebody will take a one sentence out of the Bible, like in Ecclesiastes, it says the dead know nothing. They'll throw that at me and they'll say, well, the Bible says the dead know nothing. Well, the Bible says a lot of things. If you take it out of context, you can really get screwed up. So you have to be careful. You have to know how to read the Bible. And that's not easy to do. I don't even think my pastor believed me. I'm not sure he does to this day. Just, I don't know, for whatever reason, he never gave me a reason. He didn't say it's your dying brain or your medication or whatever. I can just tell, just by his reaction, like, yeah, I don't know. Sounds kind of out there. And yeah, it does. It's out there, all right. But it happened.
What would be your advice regarding death?
I think death is just, it's just a door that we go through. I don't fear death at all. I'm actually looking forward to it. I mean, I've always said death is like moving. I'm not looking forward to the process, but I'm excited about the destination. And we're all going to die, and there's no need to fear. And that's why I became a follower of Christ, so that he can meet me there and take me down to the city and see what I didn't get to see that day. Show me the rest of the city. We were made to live forever.
How can people contact you?
through my website. It's got all my social media links, MikeMcKinsey.com. I always say, for my final message, is just slow down in your life. If you're stressed out, you just need to chill. It sounds cliche, but just slow down, appreciate the beauty. This world that we live in we live under the curse of sin, and there's still so much beauty in God's creation. Stop and watch the sunset and smell the roses, and just slow down and check into Jesus. That's my hope for everybody, is that they look into seeking the truth.
This has been the A.J. Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe.